Welcome to Latte with a Lawyer, a podcast dedicated to bringing you the stories of some of America's most successful lawyers, figuring out what makes them tick, how they creatively solve problems, and how others aspiring to be them can follow in their footsteps. Here's your host, Jacob Wells.
All right, welcome to Latte with Lawyer. I'm your host, Jacob Wells, and I'm really excited today because we have a great episode for you. We're going to be talking with Robert Astrachan, who represents plaintiffs in personal injury matters. So here's our guest, Robert Astrachan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thanks so much for spending some of your time with us today. I got to ask you before we get into anything legal related, since the show is called Latte with a Lawyer, what is your morning beverage of choice? What gets you fired up in the morning?
Right, so my favorite beverage of choice is a cortado. It's the Cuban version of a macchiato.
Yeah.
So it's basically the same. You get an espresso shot with hot milk in it instead of the foam like a macchiato. But usually to get me going in the morning, I'm just making an espresso. Then I come into the office and I wash it down with another cup of coffee, but that one's just regular. And then I'm
Yeah.
ready to go.
Right. Because the Cuban coffee, typically one of those is like pretty strong, right? With the sugar and a few shots of espresso, right?
I don't have it personally because I just don't have time really to steam the milks. But when I go to like a coffee shop, that's definitely a go-to.
Amazing. So before we get into the episode, can you give us just a bit of an overview of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm an associate at Kelner and Kelner. It's one of the premier personal injury firms in New York City. They've been in business for 75 years. Mr. Kelner has been involved in many high-profile cases. My profile, I mostly do car accidents, premises liability cases, medical malpractice cases, and products liability cases. I practiced in state and federal courts in Pennsylvania and New Jersey for 5 or 6 years. And then I've come and moved my practice to New York in the last couple of years. I moved here to live with my then girlfriend, now wife. We were living in Manhattan, and since then we've taken our lives to Long Island with our 2 little dogs.
Nice. Settling down in Long Island, moving out of the crazy hustle and bustle of the city. Yeah, absolutely.
The beach and all that.
Yeah, for sure. So how did you get into law and how did you get into this specific section and more so like what you practice now?
So I think I always had a really strong interest in helping people, especially working people. When I was growing up, my mother was a small business owner. She had a bakery, and I grew up in Puerto Rico. A lot of the employees, some of them were immigrants from the Dominican Republic. Others were just from Puerto Rico. I got to know their families. And I remember once one of the employees, their apartment had flooded and they just needed help. And I went over, I kind of helped, move boxes, things like that, so they could clean up. And it really, affected me very strongly. And I always, and I think I took that into college, that I really wanted to find a vocation in life, helping other people. In college, I kind of was interested into politics, but it felt a little bit macro. And I realized that law was something I could pursue, where you're kind of using the law to bring help to other people instead of
politics. Right. Did you go to college in the States or was this in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so I went to college at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Yeah, after high school in Puerto Rico, I came to the United States for college. I actually went to law school at Temple University, also in Philadelphia. And that's, and there, the things that started interesting me were the same kind of things, careers that were kind of in helping people. I did an immigration clinical and helped minors that came here unaccompanied get special immigrant juvenile status, which was what they were doing before, now there's the Dreamers and different kind of avenues for minors that come in here to help them out, but then that didn't exist. And I also was interested in personal injury, and I started working at it at a firm that worked with a lot of Spanish speaking clients. And that's kind of how it took off. It really was something that resonated with me because I connect with people from that background, and it
Mhm.
gave me an opportunity to help them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that you're connecting to your background and using the Spanish speaking ability to your advantage. But I'm also curious, like, what else you learned growing up in Puerto Rico that you think has influenced, your law practice now, and also a little bit curious about like what the legal industry is like there versus here.
Sure. So I think the way being from Puerto Rico, I think, has helped my law practice is the way I think just all kind of diverse perspectives help. Like I think the world has made a lot of um, has really progressed forward to a society that's much more diverse, much more wanting to understand different cultures and experiences. So I think in my law practice, it's really helped because people that are of a Hispanic background, they have a perspective, they feel that they want to be understood culturally as well as the legal need. Like when we're attorneys, like part of the work and part of what we is not just fighting for you in the courtroom, but you're also somebody's personal advisor outside of it. You need to
Hmm.
be able to like understand the shoes that somebody is walking in to be able to advise them. So I think in that sense, being from Puerto Rico has been a big help. Working with other clients of from Puerto Rico or other Hispanic backgrounds, and even with just any client, because it helps you
Hmm.
understand. Like you have to try to get into what this person's perspective is to be able to convey empathy towards them and to put their case in the best place.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting that lawyers have this need to be able to relate to so many different people on many different levels, and um, regardless of like social status, you have to treat people like a certain way and relate to everybody. Um, but I'm curious, uh, were there any particular cases that were like really personal to you? Anything that like comes to mind, an exciting case that you worked on?
Yeah, so there's a few cases that come to mind. There's one I worked on this year called Holloway versus City of New York. Was one of our really successful cases I worked on with a colleague of mine, Josh Kelner, and it was a very sad case. A young man, he was about 34 years old. He's from Illinois and he came to New York City, and he's just one of those people that never really found their footing in life.
Mm.
And he ended up as an inmate at Rikers, and he was attacked by an inmate, and he died as a result of that attack.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and we filed a lawsuit on his behalf against the city for not supervising among with other sort of things. And it was a lot of discovery, a lot of paper, but we basically found through the discovery process that the city should have been aware that this person was dangerous because he was in a gang. He had been causing a problem and being disruptive throughout the day up to the moment where this happened.
Hmm.
So it was nice to be able to help that family get some measure of justice. I mean, you could never bring back their family member, but you can get them understanding as to what happened and something to recognize the suffering that they went through and that their family member's life had value.
Hmm.
That was a really impactful case that I worked on in the last year. Um, Another case that was particularly impactful for me was we had a case where it was one of those 2 lane kind of highways on a country road
Hmm.
and there was like wide shoulders, and our client was in a car with his infant daughter and the mother and someone, passenger as well. And they got, there was a car ahead of them making a left. So they went around that car, reestablished themselves in the center, and a car made a left in front of them. everyone in the car had really horrible injuries, but the mother happened to have been breastfeeding the infant at the time, so the infant suffered a brain injury. So, when something like that happens to someone so young, it's really like a pretty hard thing.
Yeah.
It was, and it's one of those things like I got to see from the moment this happened, the horror, the impact they're experiencing as it kind of progresses, because the infant is going to have lifetime of injuries. But interestingly enough, it wasn't, she was making something of a recovery. And so it's nice to just not just, and we were able to resolve the case
Mhm.
subsequently, but it was not, it's nice to have the relationship with your client and help somebody who in their hardest time and try to help them as much as you can. That was another one that really stuck out to me.
Wow. Yeah. Between those two cases, really, really intense and tragic instances. Um, wow. I mean, how do you deal with that sort of thing on like a day-to-day basis? I mean, I'm sure that's pretty tolling to deal with that.
Well, fortunately, not all I mean, most of the clients are dealing with a situation where they're injured and they've lost some modicum, but they're not all like that. And also, I think the way that you deal with it is you know that the end result is to try to help these people out as much as you can. So, I mean, you
Hmm.
feel good when you're able to get the resolution. It's difficult. I
Right.
mean, I think it makes to do this type of work, you do have to have um, something of a thick skin to be able to deal with all of the fighting with the
Mhm.
adversary, and then also all of the sad kind of stories. I mean, it makes you, medical malpractice cases, different things. They make you kind of a little bit afraid of doing certain
Mhm.
things, or when you're in a car, but you're able to kind of deal. I think it takes a certain personality type that you're able to kind of
Right.
compartmentalize the stories and see it
Hmm.
as in the most positive light you can to try to
Yeah.
help other people is the payoff for listening to all
Right.
for absorbing all the suffering on behalf of others. Or
Yeah. I'm kind of curious because you said that with all this information, you're cautious, whether it be medical malpractice or what have you, and it gives you this different perspective. Um, is there like a certain type of case unique to New York that has given you a certain outlook? Like, do you look at New York City a different way, having been a lawyer here? Like, I'm just curious about anything New York related, like specifically.
no, not. I mean, I think everywhere it's sort of like I've practiced in many, like I said, many different jurisdictions. So I've practiced in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, in New York. I mean, everywhere you kind of see, unfortunately, things just happen. I mean, it's the nature of the world. People make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes they have serious consequences. But I don't. In New York, it's not any kind of different than anywhere. I mean, I think it's some of it is things that are common sense to yourself too. I've seen people not wear seatbelts or something. I mean, there's just things that happen also that's what I mean by I try to be more cautious because I know
Right.
things happen in a car. You don't think you're going to be the person that's going to go through this horrible situation, but
Mhm.
sadly people make mistakes, and that's why I'd like to be there to step in and help people
Right.
when
Right.
something bad happens, to try to get them at least some measure of justice.
Hmm. Well, on a more positive note, I'm curious what you think the future of the legal industry looks like with technology advancing every day, with AI, all these tools that we have at our disposal. What do you think the future looks like?
So I think there's a few things that come to mind with the future in our practice. In ours, we're seeing a lot of the way all of the technologies that exist out there, like social media, Amazon, all these kind of surveillance technologies are kind of invading the litigation sphere.
Hmm.
So a lot of what we're seeing now is that insurance companies are trying to get people's Facebook information, their Fitbit data, their dating profiles to see what they're doing. So I think that's an area where you're going to see, just like in the rest of the world, everyone's very concerned about privacy.
Right.
Elsewhere, I think that's an area where you're going to see a lot of action in my space, whether we're going to move to a world where all this social media stuff is truly going to come into not just your bubble, but employers looking at it, or if you have a
Mm-hmm.
case against someone, them being able to get what you were doing on a random weekend in July just because you have a case.
Right.
Now your whole world is open. So that's one way I see technology coming in a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious kind of to see too whether VR is going to come into courtrooms. Like, I remember when I was starting, like a lot of lawyers are using like these, those big paper kind of charts to write things on. And
Oh
then
yeah, yeah.
now you're seeing a lot of accident reconstruction. I've worked with them and they're kind of like video, but I haven't seen anyone show it to me yet, but I'm interested. Like, I've had VR experiences
Yeah.
where you feel like you're there.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that kind of thing would be something really powerful for a jury to see, to convey anything. And
Yeah, that would be pretty cool if everybody in the jury just had like a VR set and
yeah,
they were able to see like what it was like in
right,
a crime scene.
right.
Uh,
I don't know if that's where it's going to happen. I mean, it's a little bit intense. I don't
mm-hmm.
know, but I'm
Yeah.
interested to see if those kind of technologies make their way. The other thing in my industry too that I'm thinking is, everyone knows there's lots of self-driving cars. They're on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
How that's sort of going to play out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking we're going to see more product liability cases, because I think if the cars aren't driving themselves, if the people aren't driving the cars, forgive me, there's going to be situations where an accident happened, and why did it happen? Is it because the software said you should hit the deer instead of shifting out of the way of the deer, or
Mm.
whatever the thing is? The
Yeah.
machine is making a decision all the way down the line. So there'll be the software manufacturers, the I wonder if that's kind of where that's going to go, or if there's going to be very few car accidents, or it's going to just be put on the consumer, like they have insurance for their cars. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting. I think sorry, say that again.
I think that's something that I'm watching out for in the next 10, 20 years. What happens with those kind of.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you say that because I think somebody else had a similar answer. They were curious about the self-driving cars and thought that there would be, like you said, an increase in product liability cases. But really, really appreciate your insight on that. And, I really enjoyed our conversation. So thanks so much for joining us. This has been Jacob Wells for Latte with the Lawyer. I want to thank Robert Astrachan of Kelner and Kelner for joining us today. And thanks to our sponsor, Motion Track, without a K, that uses artificial intelligence and mobile app audiences to economically and quickly gather focus group research and data for trials and mediations. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks.
All right, take care.